Was it torture or enhanced interrogation? The Senate report on CIA activities following 9/11 has started a debate all around the globe. We'll continue it with former CIA General Counsel John Rizzo and former CIA analyst Patrick Eddington of the Cato Institute in studio. And the enigma that is Pope Francis. Will explore his Argentinian background and new details surrounding his election. With author of the new biography, The Great Reformer, AUSTEN IVEREIGH, is here. And an order of nuns that topped the classical charts last year have a new CD, The Rosary. Mother ASSUMPTA Long and Sister Joseph Andrew of the Dominican Sisters of Mary are in studio. And finally, I attended the premiere of Exodus, Gods and Kings this week. We'll exclusively discuss the Moses flick with star Christian Bale and director Ridley Scott, and I'll share my reactions. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. John Rizzo and Patrick Eddington, AUSTEN IVEREIGH, and the Dominican Sisters of Mary, as well as Ridley Scott and Christian Bale, are all straight ahead. We could go for 3 hours tonight. But alas, if you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send a tweet to Raymond Arroyo or send us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get going. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. A new Senate investigation of the CIA is stirring debate over the spy agency's use of torture, or enhanced interrogation techniques, as they've been called. The Senate Intelligence Committee report concluded that the agency inflicted suffering on al-Qaeda prisoners beyond its legal authority. It claimed that enhanced interrogations did not provide critical or life-saving intelligence. The report cited CIA documents detailing uses of waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and other lesser-known techniques. California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was publicly ambivalent about these interrogation techniques in 2006, changed her tune this time around.
The CIA program was far more brutal than people were led to believe. At no time did the CIA's coercive interrogation techniques lead to the collection of intelligence on an imminent threat that many believe was the justification for the use of these techniques.
Former and current CIA employees fought back against the allegations. They insist the tactics worked in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, including providing info that led to the capture of Osama bin Laden. In a Wall Street Journal opinion piece, 3 former CIA directors called the report a one-sided study marred by errors. Current CIA Director John Brennan also defended the agency in a public statement on Thursday. More on all of this later in the show. Also this week, the United States and NATO officially closed their combat mission in Afghanistan. Over 13 years after first invading the country in the wake of September 11th, it took only weeks for the U.S.-led forces to rout the Taliban government that sheltered al-Qaeda militants and Osama bin Laden. In the years that followed, the coalition spent billions of dollars rebuilding a country devastated by nearly 30 years of war. 3,500 foreign soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan since 2001, including 2,200 Americans. The U.S. will draw down troops from 10,000 to 0 by the end of 2016. Taliban militants have reasserted their presence in the region with continued attacks. And more reports of Islamic State's brutality against Christians. Anglican canon Andrew White, also known as the Vicar of Baghdad, told the Orthodox Christian Network that Christians, including children, are being beheaded.
ISIS turned up and they said to the children, "You say the words that you will follow Muhammad." And the children, all under 15, 4 of them, they said, "No, we love Yeshua. We have always loved you, sir. We have always followed you, sir. Your sir has always been with us. They said, say the words. They said, no, we can't. They chopped all their heads off.
Heartbreaking. Canon White has also had his life threatened by ISIS. Under orders from the Archbishop of Canterbury, he has since moved to Israel. And a new warning about the imminent threat of climate change, this time from Pope Francis. In a message to the UN Climate Change Conference underway in Lima, Peru, the Pope wrote that time is running out to find global solutions. He said, quote, there is therefore a clear, definite, and urgent ethical imperative to act. 195 countries are participating in the conference, seeking a new international agreement for reducing carbon emissions, believed by most government leaders to be the cause of global warming. And the spiritual leader of the Anglican Communion is warning that the worldwide Anglican Church could face schism over disagreements about homosexuality and female ordination. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said in an interview with the Times of London, quote, despite all efforts, there is a possibility that we will not hold together, end quote. Welby made the comment after visiting the Church's 38 global provinces. Discord has been percolating in recent years over the recognition of blessing same-sex unions, as well as the ordination of women as priests and bishops. The issue was exacerbated last month when the Church of England, the mother church of all Anglicans, approved the ordination of women bishops. At 80 million members, the Anglican Communion is the third largest Christian denomination in the world. And in Rome, Pope Francis is speaking publicly about the recently completed Synod on the Family and the controversial topics surrounding it. In an interview with Argentina's La Nación, the Pope reiterated that the Church's teaching on the indissolubility of marriage would not be changed. However, he did say that effective pastoral care for divorced and remarried Catholics must include integrating them into the life of the Church. The Pope noted that though the Synod never discussed gay marriage, the bishops must consider how to minister to families with gay members. Meanwhile, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI has reiterated his position that those who are divorced and remarried without an annulment cannot receive Holy Communion. In an interview with the Frankfurt General, the retired Pope said he has always taken the position that it is impossible for such Catholics to receive the Eucharist. In the same interview, Benedict revealed that upon renouncing the papacy, he wanted to be called simply Father Benedict. He said that in rejecting both the title of Pope Emeritus and Benedict XVI, it would offer a clearer distinction from the papacy. He claims he has been too weak to push the title at the time, or had been too weak to push it at the time. He did, however, encourage his German interviewer to include his desire to be known as Father Benedict in the article, noting that his health is much better these days. When we return, the blockbuster Senate report on torture was released this week. Former CIA General Counsel, the man responsible for the so-called torture memos and providing the legal justification for black sites, John Rizzo, and PATRICK EDDINGTON of the Cato Institute join us in an exclusive debate. And Christian Bale on Exodus is straight ahead. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The Senate Intelligence Committee released its 600-page summary report this week on CIA interrogation techniques used in the wake of 9/11. Washington has been abuzz ever since. Did the CIA cross the line into torture, or were the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques justified in order to keep America safe? Here to discuss are former CIA General Counsel during the Bush administration and author of the book Company Man, John Rizzo, and former policy analyst at the CIA, and now at the Cato Institute, Patrick Eddington. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Mr. Rizzo, I want to start with you. There is the suggestion in the report that these techniques went beyond the legal definition of torture, that they included torture. Do you see it that way? Did you see it that way? A lot of this crossed your desk.
Yeah, Raymond, we have to be a little careful here about our use of phrases because it can be confusing. First of all, as you know, there was an interrogation program that I was heavily involved in creating, providing a legal foundation. It generated...
You were the man they came to for legal...
Right. And I was the guy who went to the Department of Justice and got back what became euphemistically known as the torture memos.
Right.
So they approved, as not violating the torture statute, 11 techniques, including waterboarding.
There were some that were not approved.
There were some that were not approved. And I think what you're referring to in the report are those instances of abuses. And there were abuses during the 7-year duration of this program. I would contend occasional and isolated and aberrant, but there were abuses, yes.
So you would not consider waterboarding, sleep deprivation, power drills, insects, the cramped confinement, that didn't cross the line?
Well, you mentioned power drills. That was one of the abuses. One of the interrogators decided to get creative and use a power drill next to
a guy's head.
Yeah. Now, that, as it happened, just to be clear, the interrogator was yanked out of the facility and was retired in lieu of termination shortly thereafter. But the waterboarding and the others you mentioned, that is one of the 11 techniques which the Justice Department concluded did not cross the legal standard for torture.
Patrick Eddington, what's wrong with that?
Well, I think we know, based on international law and, in fact, U.S. statute, that these techniques, particularly the more radical ones that John has described, do, in fact, constitute torture. And I'd like to share with our viewers a little something from the Senate committee report. This is on page 33 for those who might be interested. After the July 2002 meetings, the CIA's redacted, CTC legal redacted, drafted a letter to Attorney General John Ashcroft asking the Department of Justice for, quote, a formal declination of prosecution in advance for any employees of the United States, as well as any other personnel acting on behalf of the United States, who may employ methods in the interrogation of Abu Zubaydah, this is one of the detainees from the first ones, that otherwise might subject these individuals to prosecution, end quote. And if you go through the Senate report summary, you find repeated references to concerns that folks were raising inside the agency about potential legal liability and whether or not this was actually violating the Geneva Conventions. I think the lesson for the country, beyond the horrors that we've read about, is that the Central Intelligence Agency should be in the intelligence business, not the detention business. And if anyone really bears responsibility for this at the end of the day, it isn't actually President Bush, because in the covert action memorandum of notification that he signed 6 days after the 9/11 attacks, he didn't authorize any of these things. This comes down to George Tenet ultimately making a decision to go forward with this.
John Rizzo, there is also the suggestion here that the CIA misled the president, misled congressional oversight. Is that the case now looking back?
No, I mean, we didn't do it looking forward and not looking back. I think what happened here is the Senate report, which, mind you, was drafted strictly by the Democrats on the committee. They never interviewed any of us who were involved in the program. I was not allowed to even see this report until the rest of the world did yesterday, so I'm catching up quickly here. In my opinion, the Senate Democrats, the staff, had a preconceived notion that the underlying criticism, really, when you get right down to it, is that in their view, the program didn't work. It was ineffective. It didn't do any good.
Right.
Therefore, they went back in each of these cases, and in all of those instances, we in the agency, and I would include myself in that, they dump on me for intentionally misleading the Department of Justice, because we went over, and among other things, we told these people the value the program had been given the kind of intelligence that had been derived from it. So since they did not agree with that, the Senate Democrats, ergo, everything we said was intentionally misleading to everybody. Particularly preposterous is the notion that we deceived the White House. I mean, I can't tell you how many National Security Council meetings I went to, chaired by the Vice President.
So are you saying President Bush did have knowledge of these, these practices?
He did. Now, in fairness, I never personally briefed President Bush. I personally briefed Vice President Cheney, National Security Advisor Rice, Chief of Staff Andy Card, White House Counsel Alberto Gonzales.
So the White House was not in the dark?
No, and I assume one or more of them briefed the President. I just can't say from direct knowledge, being in the room, that he was
I want to play both of you something. This is John Brennan, the current CIA director. He said there was intelligence gleaned from these, albeit they harsh, and they might be torture. Listen.
What I said was that detainees who were subjected to EITs at some point during their confinement subsequently provided information that our experts found to be useful and valuable in our counterterrorism efforts. And the cause and effect relationship between the application of those EITs and the ultimate provision of the information is unknown and unknowable.
Patrick, the CIA director here and previous CIA directors said there was information gleaned from this, and in the context of the moment, in that the desire to stop another terrorist attack, these were desperate measures, but these were desperate times. You'd say what?
Yeah, well, we've been through this before, haven't we? I mean, our country has been through multiple world wars over the course of the last century, and of course, this particular threat. And it wasn't until this particular event, 9/11, and what John and others helped to construct afterwards, that we actually walked down the dark side, to use Jane Mayer's phrase. There's no question that there was absolutely no intelligence gleaned from this that helped prevent an attack on the United States. I'm not here to defend necessarily the work that Senator Feinstein and her staff did. Personally, I think it's outstanding work. I would very much take issue with what John said previously about this being some kind of partisan hit job. I think you look only to what John McCain had to say about this to know that there is a bipartisan understanding now, at least I think among a plurality of members and hopefully a majority, that we're not doing this again.
Let's talk for a moment about the timing of this and releasing it at all. 7 years after this program is dead and gone. I mean, President Obama banned the use of these techniques. That was 7 years ago. Is there a danger to releasing them now? What is the reaction of allies? And is this a productive discussion to have out in the open? John Rizzo.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I've actually been on record in the media several months ago, because this report's been hanging fire seemingly forever, that I thought the report should come out. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that it was clear. I mean, there were such sort of leaks. It was clear it was going to be harshly critical of the agency and probably of me.
You, yeah.
Because I thought, you know, taking 5 years, $40 million, whatever it was. The American people paid for it. They should see it. That said, I must say, so that's where I was. But last Friday, I was startled to read that Secretary Kerry, a liberal Democrat from Massachusetts, Secretary of State Kerry, apparently felt obliged or compelled to call the Chairman Feinstein to, again, I'm going on news reports and I have no inside knowledge, apparently warn her of the dangers and the risk that would be posed by releasing the report at this particular moment in time. I don't recall it ever happening before, and the fact it was done by all people, John Kerry, I just found striking.
I want to play John McCain. I want you both to react. This is John McCain from the floor. Listen.
It's a thorough and thoughtful study of practices that I believe not only failed their purpose to secure actionable intelligence to prevent further attacks on the U.S. and our allies, but actually damaged our security interests as well as our reputation as a force for good in the world.
There's no question. I think that it's going to take our country decades, if ever, essentially kind of climb out of this pit that we've been in. But this at least is a first step. You know, Raymond, mass surveillance and torture are the hallmarks of totalitarian regimes. The United States has employed both of those tactics over the last 13 years. We need to renounce both, and we need to renounce them forever.
But the surveillance continues, as do these drone attacks, which I find it perplexing to see politicians fulminating and losing their lunch over this. Yet there are ongoing policies that this administration and that these Congress people have endorsed. Drone strikes of citizens and foreigners.
And Americans?
Well, abroad. These things have happened abroad. Question to you before I let you go, John Rizzo. Any regrets at all, looking back on this?
Oh, sure. I mean, I made mistakes. As I say, the program was not perfect. It had to be put together quickly, and it wasn't at times not well managed. And I didn't, at all times, manage the legal process well. For instance, I should have pushed back early to the White House. They insist on keeping the knowledge in the Congress to 8 people, the leadership. That was a huge mistake. We should have briefed the entire intelligence committees from the beginning. I regret that. It was a White House call, but we should have, and I should have, fought back harder on that, because at the end, you saw what happened. The 8 weren't there. So, so sure, I have some regrets. But overall, on the fundamental questions, no.
No, not about the black sites or any of that.
Nope.
No. Patrick, last word.
The CIA should not be in the detention business. It should be the intelligence gathering business. That's how it best serves America.
Okay, we will leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here and for the thoughtful conversation. When we return, before he was elected Pope, he was Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio. My next guest is author of an extensive biography of the man who became Francis. Austin Ivereigh will introduce us to the great reformer when the world over continues in a moment, and Christian Bale straight ahead. Keep it there. Thank you both for being here. Thank you, John.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Pope Francis continues to be one of the most fascinating and misunderstood figures of our day. In a new biography, The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope, Austin Ivereigh discloses new facts about Jorge Bergoglio, his election, and his background in Argentina, which is where we started our spirited interview. Take a look. You have a quote. You said, he would come to respect Peronism as the expression of the values of ordinary people. What of that respect do you see in this papacy?
He's always rooted himself in what he calls God's holy faithful people. The ordinary people, not the elites, not the educated, not the rich, but the ordinary believing poor. And Peronism, you know, as a political party, as a political movement, has been a bit of a disaster often, and he's opposed it. But Peronism spoke to and articulated those values of the children of migrants, the Catholics, who looked back, you know, to the Spanish tradition rather than to other countries.
And Juan Perón was also a populist.
He was, and in many ways, you know, there's, and I draw the analogy in the book, you know, because in many ways they have a lot in common. Both speak very clearly to people, they have a warm bond with people, they understand and relate to ordinary people. Yes. And in fact, in many ways, both rule very personalistically and so on.
That's true. That's true. And they both know how to work a balcony. But
right.
I want to raise a question here about Cardinal George before his retirement of Chicago. He raised a few questions, and I thought it would be interesting to have you react to these questions, in that you've spent so much time now researching and watching this man up close. Why doesn't he clarify these ambiguous statements that he makes? Cardinal George asked on his way out of office. Why doesn't he do so? And I imagine he's thinking about who am I to judge, which has been taken out of context and used in innumerable ways. The call to that divorced woman in Argentina who was divorced and remarried, and he said, go ahead to communion. Why not come out and clarify those things?
There's a tension, maybe even a contradiction in this Pope, in that he wants to be able to continue to be a pastor. He wants to be able to speak to people very directly. And actually, when he's speaking to that person, the only thing that matters to him is that other person. In that sense, he's a real pastor. He's present to that person and doesn't, in a way, care about what other people think or know or how they might interpret them. Now, one might say, as a pope, he's no longer should be doing that. He needs to realize he can't. But it's, I think, vital for him to be able to retain that as pope, because he does consider himself now the world's pastor. Before, he was Argentina's pastor before that. Do you know what? But he remains a pastor. So some of the ambiguity now, when he says, you know, who am I to judge, when he said on the plane, actually, I thought the whole quote wasn't ambiguous. He was quoting from the Catechism. You know, but it was interpreted, wasn't it, through a particular filter.
Correct.
I think he's used to being misinterpreted, and at one level he's not bothered.
Yeah, no, he's clearly not bothered by it. And this is Cardinal George's next question was, does he not realize the repercussions for clergy, for bishops, for the people who have to then, you know, the middle managers who have to go out and carry the message forward?
Maybe the problem is that we've got a bit used to a church that we think is built for clarity. What he wants is a church built for mission, that can evangelize, that can take the church outside the choir. You know that famous speech he gave on the eve of the conclave, which so impressed the cardinals, and he said, you know, Jesus is on the door, usually understood to be outside knocking in. In fact, he thinks we've got Jesus tied up in the sacristy and he's knocking to be let out. So I think this is what he wants. He wants to take the church out. Now, that means mess, disorder, misunderstanding, ambiguity sometimes, because when you take the church into people's lives, that's what, you know, in many ways what he's doing is bridging the gap between the real church, you know, of the frontier of the parish and Rome.
But isn't part of the papal function to provide clarity? He is Peter who stands up and says, no, 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 this is what it is. This is what we believe. This is where we go.
Clarity's good, and clarity converts, and clarity is obviously a virtue, or indeed the Pope must teach clearly, the Church must teach clearly. But maybe sometimes if we say that clarity is all that we're about, then maybe we're missing out something else. I think what he's doing is actually fulfilling or filling out church teaching to say it isn't just what the Church says is true, it's also that the Church is the means of people coming into contact with a loving, merciful Church and God.
Let's talk about a few of the contradictions, and one that I have seen over these many, now almost 2 years. The Pope clearly wants to have a more consultative episcopal experience where we bring people in. The Synod on the Family is a good example in not one but two parts. It's clear that he wants that conversation and that group discussion and group think. At the same time, he's choosing with deliberateness the people who will draft that message, write that message, and we saw what happened at the Synod on the Family. Do you think he's aware of that tension? And does that undermine his consultative intention by sort of jimmying the process?
I was at the Synod, and I'm not sure I accept the reading of it. We can come back to that in a minute. I think what he was doing with the Synod, what he is doing with the Synod, is saying we must look at some of these very difficult pastoral questions. We must live in the tension, which is humanly very hard to do. How do we uphold the indissolubility of marriage while at the same time coming alongside those whose marriages have broken? Now, those questions are not easy, but they were left us by Christ. I mean, Jesus treated the adulteress not just as a sinner, but as a victim in need of healing. So he left us that tension, and we've got to live in that tension. Now, he is confident, and I think I show in my biography that actually his whole life, intellectually and spiritually, has been about this, has been how does the Church develop its understanding? How does it develop in through time and in the world? And you do that by living in tension and by inviting the Holy Spirit in. And over time, if you give it time and you're faithful, then new creative possibilities and solutions will open up. So I think that's what he was trying to do with the Synod. Why did he get Cardinal Kasper to make that address to those cardinals at the beginning of it? Because actually Cardinal Kasper presents the problem. You know, how do we have a more merciful church? How do we, you know? And so he wasn't saying, this is what I want to happen. He was saying, he allowed Kasper, as it were, to shake things up.
Yeah.
And then he's asking the church to sit in that tension for a year, confident that if there's a convergence at the end of it, and there may not be, but if there's a convergence at the end of it, that actually we can be confident that the Holy Spirit has acted through that process, just as it did in the early church with early church councils.
Well, in the early church councils, we also had bishops popping each other across the mouth, which frankly I'd love to see.
And does that well, you know, does that matter? I mean, obviously I'm not...
To me it does. It's great TV. Sure it matters. Yeah, my ratings go...
I'm not advocating intra-episcopal violence, but on the other hand...
So look, St. Nicholas was even imprisoned because he was, you know, throwing the punches.
Pope Francis himself said this, actually, to the clergy in Caserta. He said, I prefer that we're throwing punches than that we're pretending that we all agree.
But he doesn't prefer that.
Honest disagreement is fine.
He came out afterward and said he was annoyed that these bishops were talking out of school and talking about what was happening in the Synod. So he didn't say that, Austin. Afterward, that's exactly... He said exactly the opposite.
No, what he was concerned about was, if you like, the politicization of the Synod, where you get divided into parties and all the rest of it. He dislikes that because he sees that as division. The difference is divine. but division is diabolical, is one of the phrases he's used. Now, what's the difference between the two? The difference is that there's nothing wrong with honest disagreement, but the problem is that once you start to adhere to your ideas and reject somebody else's, then you've fallen into division. It's all about how you manage that process of discernment. He's a good Jesuit, right? And so, honest disagreement, but not parties.
I want to talk about the conversations with Eugenio Scalfari, this atheist editor and founder of the great Italian newspaper
La Repubblica.
La Repubblica, and they have had repeated conversations. But coming out of that, the Vatican has pulled down the articles. They've had to clarify and correct. Why does he continue to talk to this man? I realize, and I've read, you and others have written, he's more interested in that individual, and he thinks he's engaging Scalfari. Fantastic. Engage him over tea and scones. Why are you doing it in a public way that invites misinterpretation? And indeed, there is a pattern and series of it now.
I've been a communications professional in the church as well as a journalist, and believe me, I asked the same question. I mean, you know, how could he have sat down with this 90-year-old atheist who didn't even have
Didn't take notes,
no recording? The guy then writes it up, apparently gives it to Pope Francis. Francis says, okay, I don't need to read it, I trust you. And then the thing goes out, and of course it's full of distortions and full of things he never said. Does he not realise? I think the answer is, and I have spoken to many people, it's not just about the relationship with him. I think the dialogue, the relationship that he's built up with Scalfari, and the way that through Scalfari he can speak to people who don't know the church and who are outside the church, that's the valuable thing. See, the secret to him is he's a master builder of bridges. He builds bridges beyond the boundaries of faith, politics, culture, and he believes that the Holy Spirit, that God acts through those bridges, and that his job as Pope is to open up those spaces. Now, if he were too preoccupied with, you know, accuracy and making sure that everything was absolutely clear, that would make it more difficult to build those bonds of friendship. Does that make sense?
It does, but at the same time, he's the Pope, and
I know.
Confusion is the problem. People read this and they're confused. The faithful are confused, and the people who I think he's trying to engage, they're similarly confused. So I don't see how that furthers his, if that is indeed his goal, how it connects there.
Because I think you're still perhaps attached to this idea of a church built above all
Not
for
a church,
clarity.
people being clear.
But is there anything that Scalfari said that Francis said? I mean, he got a lot of things wrong that were clearly inaccurate. But what was the impact of that? Has church teaching been in any way changed or modified by that?
No, but I think as you referenced in the book, you say, and I'm going to quote you because I think it's a good quote. You say at one point that there are those who believe Francis's radicalism is not to be confused with a progressive doctrine or ideology. But that sort of interview invites this misinterpretation of who I see. The man I see is the man you portray in the book, who I do think is thinking outside the box, engaging media, and people who would never have given the church any time of day. Suddenly they're engaged, they're listening. The downside of that is it does invite this misunderstanding, does it not?
It does, and I think, you know, I can't defend what Pope Francis did on the Scalfari interview. I think what I'm trying to do is understand it.
Yeah, me too.
In terms of his life, and definitely back when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, you know, phoning people, for example, you know, and then they would later, of course, give an account of that phone call, and sometimes go on radio, you know, and say, well, and would he react? Would he act to correct it? No. Why? I spoke to his advisors. They would say, because at one level he said, I said what I said. If that person then wants to use it in some way, that's up to them. I know what I've said. It's a different way of thinking. It's an extremely unpolitical way of thinking.
Well, as a pope, it's a hard way, because you're basically, when the Pope speaks, one assumes this is the law. He is teaching us what we are expected as Catholics today to do and live. And when he says these things on the phone, even though he's intending it just for that woman, the world now knows, is that the message? Can we just ignore local pastors and the bishop?
Okay, but is it
because of that phone call?
But is it just what the Pope says? You know, is the Pope a vehicle for church teaching, or is the Pope a model of Christ?
He's both. He's both.
But is the way he acts and the way he is actually just as powerful, indeed as important? I mean, this is a Pope who actually speaks through actions and through his warmth, and has had a massive impact. You know, the kissing of the man with neurofibromatosis, inviting women to breastfeed in the Sistine Chapel, inviting homeless in for breakfast, including their dog. These things have made a profound impact on people.
No, beautiful gestures. And John Paul II, I mean, I'm old enough to remember,
who also,
he did the same same thing. I mean, it's not like this is the first time we've had a Pope engage people and kiss babies. I mean, this has happened for decades.
Of course not.
And I heard a beautiful story about Pope Francis just the other day. A Monsignor I know in Rome was on his way to visit his dying mother. She's dying of cancer in London. He receives a phone call on the way to the airport, and it's Pope Francis. And he says, the first thing I want you to do is to give her my blessing and tell her I'm praying for her healing. Please do that. I'm commanding you to do that. The impact that this left on this man, and he said the tenderness, he regarded me with the tenderness of a mother, is what he told me.
Which is what he does.
Which is lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lovely
And that is him. He has the tenderness of a mother, and maybe that's the most important thing about him, rather than that he teaches clearly. He's not a theologian, he's not a philosopher. You know, unlike John Paul II, unlike Pope Benedict, you know, he's above all, and he's an extremely clever man, but in a sense for him, ideas are not the most important thing, it is the heart. He acts from the heart. Sometimes, therefore, leaves things. But I think he's pretty confident that there are quite a few people ready in the Vatican and commentators, you know, like you and me, who can clear up ambiguities on his behalf when necessary.
Now, well, as Cardinal George said, why should we be in the cleanup crew? And that's true. I feel awkward having to. What do I know? None of us are in his mind. None of us can explain away these things.
We know what the Church teaches.
Of course we do. But if the Pope seemingly is saying something counter to that, and the Vatican doesn't correct it, the woman says, he told me, as a divorced and remarried Catholic, I can go to communion. That's what he told me. Who am I to then say, you can't do that? Now I look like the hater, right?
No, what we have
and so do you.
No, what we have to do, and it's very simple, we say, actually, this is what the Church teaches, these are the rules, right? And you can be sure that the Pope has not contradicted those. You can be sure. And he never, I mean, I've been through his life, I spoke to the people who work with him, he often did make those calls. And I said, in fact, to his press advisor after that famous call, I said, he said, no way, he would never, ever have contradicted Church teaching.
Let's move on to the conclave. You report some new details here that I found fascinating. You contend in the book that your former boss, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, Cardinal Casper, Cardinal Gottfried Daniels, Karl Lehmann, that they conspired is too hard a word, that they collaborated to whip up votes in the conclave to support Bergoglio. Since your book came out, your former boss and others have denied this account, but they really took issue with one little phrase. Not that they were whips, but
right. They're not disputing that they went around urging their fellow cardinals to vote for Cardinal Bergoglio. That's quite normal at conclaves. I mean, how else do popes get elected?
They have people who whip votes up.
Well, yeah, whip up votes, exactly.
Candidates.
Yes, and they suggest it and so on. And usually, before you go into a conclave, actually, a cardinal needs to have quite a lot of support in order then to become pope, because getting from that first ballot to the last one, you know, is that there's usually only 4 or 5 ballots. What Cardinal Cormac objected to was a particular line in my account where I said that what I wanted to say was, unlike 2005, because they also wanted him elected then, this time they thought he'd be willing. But rather than say they thought he'd be willing, I said they sought his consent. Now, that implies that they actually went to him and said, would you be willing to be a candidate? Now, that would be forbidden by conclave rules. I knew that didn't happen, and I'm really sorry. I have apologised publicly for the misunderstanding that's caused. And actually, even the ebook now carries a different line, and that will be corrected in future reprints. But the account that I give of those cardinals wanting him to be elected and urging other cardinals to elect him, that is true.
You said that they had learned lessons, this group of cardinals, from 2005. What was that lesson?
Well, the lesson was, I think, in 2005, they had wanted to vote for him, and a lot of votes, of course, did go in his direction. But they didn't, as it were, sound him out, either directly or indirectly. They didn't, as it were, do their homework. In fact, Cardinal Bergoglio, in my account, was convinced in 2005 that neither he nor the Church, the Latin American Church, was ready for the papacy. And it's one of the revelations in the book, actually, is how much it wasn't just about a man, but about a whole church. And he didn't want to be seen as an anti-Ratzinger candidate. And so, anyway, all I meant was that they didn't do, if you like, much of their background. This time in 2013, they were much more prepared, much more ready. They'd done much more thinking, and they were convinced that this time he wouldn't resist.
And it was his time,
yeah. And he, of course, he had become aware that it was his time as well.
Where is this pontificate going? I mean, Benedict, it was clarity, it was restoration of the liturgy. John Paul, it was human dignity, the cry of human dignity in the human person around the globe. What will be the through line of this pontificate? Some still can't see it, many can't.
If there is to be one thing that this papacy will be remembered for, it is initiating a reform not just in structures, but in the way that the Church is seen and perceived, above all, by the non-Catholic world. That, if you like, a church of the first week of the spiritual exercises, not just the second week. Church as mother and healer and lover, as well as clear teacher. And I think we need to get used to both.
The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. My next guest sat atop Billboard's classical charts for several weeks last year. Not bad for an order of nuns. What is it about the voices of these religious sisters that have so captivated the secular music market, not to mention the hearts of secular music fans and Catholic music fans? Here to tell us about their new CD, The Rosary, Mysteries, Meditations, and Music, are Mother ASSUMPTA Long and Sister Joseph Andrew. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
The Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
Tell me about this new CD. Why the Rosary, Mother ASSUMPTA, of all things?
Raymond, are you a Catholic?
Yeah.
Okay. I honestly cannot think of anything Dominicans could do more other than the Eucharist is to promote the Rosary. And, you know, when you think about it, when you really and truly think about it, it goes back to the time of Christ. I mean, when you think, because the Rosary is not just a vocal prayer, but it's a mental prayer, where you think about all the mysteries. John Paul II said something so beautiful. He said that we look with Mary's eyes to the face of Christ. We look with Mary to the face of Christ. And so we're thinking about the whole life of our Lord, and the luminous mysteries. I think John Paul II saw, you know, we're all the way from, you know, it skips a whole segment of our Lord's life, and it kind of connects it. So it puts us in his public life, and from John the Baptist, but
this is an 800-year tradition,
an
too.
800, yeah. Oh, right. Well,
not the luminous mysteries. Which the reason you mentioned that, I should tell everybody, was a little dig at me, because I said I don't pray the luminous mysteries. I pray the others, but not the luminous mysteries. So thanks for making me feel.
Oh, okay. I intended that. Right.
Sister Joseph, you are the vocations director. You are the vicar in the monastery, this huge monastery that continues to grow everywhere, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You assembled this recording and sort of shaped it.
Well, there's a group of us that did that. And the reason, Raymond, is because after the first CD, the Mater Eucharistiae, there were so many people that said, we want to also pray with you. You know, music leads you into contemplative prayer, which is what we certainly found was the role that I think God had us make the first one, is to lead a very busy culture, a very busy people into prayer, you know, kind of more quickly and more deeply and more contemplatively. Anyway, but they do come and on Sundays and they pray the Divine Office with us and they pray the Rosary, and they said, well, can we have a Rosary CD? We had considered Divine Office, but we said, well, Dominicans, the Rosary is just, as Mother just said, it's just so Dominican. We just love it. We wear it at our side and we pray it all the time.
And this is really, it's both a how-to, really, an audio how-to manual, as well as a meditative device.
Yes.
And that's what's sort of neat about it. And it's, you all did the accompaniment. I mean, all the music in the background are your sisters.
Right.
Mother ASSUMPTA, you saw the show as we were doing the earlier segments. We've got everything from torture to confusion in the church. What is it about these times that you think are drawing people, giving them, they almost have a yearning for God and want a new way to God, and is this the answer?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think about in the times of crisis in the church, you know, just to give you one example that very much embraces the thought of the Rosary, and that was the Battle of Lepanto.
Oh, sure.
You know, when Pius V, a good Dominican, even because the Christians defeated the Turks, which was miraculous, actually, but he established the Feast of the Holy Rosary, in 1571, which was October 7th. And you think, but not only that, you know, it's interesting because the popes, there have to be, let's say, over a dozen popes who have put the rosary in apostolic bulls or encyclicals, and even, I think it was Alexander VI who first granted the indulgence. And you know, I'll bet a lot of people don't know this, and I think it's so important that, that Pius XI granted a plenary indulgence to, if you say the rosary in front of the Blessed Sacrament, you gain a plenary indulgence. He said that in 1938. But I just wonder, and I think, just think of all the indulgences, but the popes throughout the ages have really granted indulgences, particularly to rosary confraternities, you know.
Sister Joseph, who are you trying to reach with this CD? And what do you say to those who are looking in, some people who aren't Catholic, and they say, well, what's this rosary thing?
Do you know, Raymond, we are trying to reach everyone, because I really do think, I know a lot of Protestant friends who have always loved the rosary. I think it's a mystical prayer that really touches everyone's heart if you allow it. And of course, Protestants also are so scripturally based. And this is just a compendium of the gospel. That too is, you know, St. John Paul the Great, you know, saying you have this way of loving, you know, the life of Christ through the eyes of his mother. I think that touches everyone that allows themselves to be touched. And I think when people see and experience the prayer of the rosary, and what the CD does, it puts beautiful music behind it. So it just is a very beautiful way of going into contemplative prayer.
I also like that you have the meditations with each mystery. Sometimes you just hear the mystery, and if you're not familiar with them, you really don't know. Your mind starts to kind of wander. Here you have the meditation to focus on throughout the repetition of those 10 Hail Marys.
You know, Raymond, I was thinking, if there was nothing else, when you think of the Blessed Mother herself promoted the rosary. You know, you think she prayed the rosary with Bernadette at Lourdes.
Oh, yeah.
And she told little Francesca, one of the Fatima children, you've got to say a lot of rosaries before you get to heaven. And the poor little thing was just going around all the way saying the rosary all the time.
The rest of her
and
life.
so you think, well, my goodness, you know, if there was nothing else, I think, to get it promoted by the Blessed Mother, I mean, I don't think you can do, I don't think you can go any further better than that. You know?
She's a pretty good spokesperson.
She's a pretty good
and I imagine it's sought after.
Cells.
There are 120 sisters now in your order.
Right.
To what do you explain this? Why are these vocations running through your doors?
Because God is continuing. You know, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, I always take that so literally. I will be with you until the end of the world. And so for Christ to be with us until the end of the world, we have to have fatherhood and motherhood. So the spiritual fathers are the priests we must have. The spiritual motherhoods are the sisters we must have. And so in that promise, I think there are so many vocations out there, Raymond, that young women who don't know where to go and they need to see sisters, they need to experience it, because then this has been written in my heart since baptism, and I'm only responding to God's grace. We have many vocations and many young women looking at our community, and we send them to whatever community we think they fit. You know?
And now you have a new convent in Austin, Texas.
Well, hopefully someday.
You're starting though.
Yeah,
we do.
Right.
We do.
Well,
But you know, Raymond, you know, it goes along with what Sister says. I am so impressed with young people. I think, you know, you're talking about all the problems that we experience. Just get with young people. They are so refreshing. They're so on fire. I mean, you've got them going to pro-life marches. You've got them, you know, saying the rosary. You've got them. They're just ready. I think God is taking care of us through the youth. And that's what we're all about. We're in education to try to get to the
you know,
youth.
they were made to want a cause and to go for it. And so you get them on the right track, and there's just there's no limits to what they wouldn't give God.
Well, I thank you both for being here. And Mother ASSUMPTA, I was thinking the other day, it has been 13 years since you and I were together on Mother Angelica's last live show.
Oh, that's
And you were the final guest on her live show, and I was the co-host that
That's
night.
right.
So it's a nice reuniting with you.
It's
And
good to
at
see
this
you
time of year,
again.
it was almost the same time of year.
Oh, how
So-
beautiful.
It's good to see you again.
Well, thank you all both, and the
Good.
CD is glorious.
Okay, God
you.
bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Rosary, Mysteries, Meditations, and Music by the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, from Decca and de Montfort Music, is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and at all the usual outlets, and of course through EWTN's religious catalog. Before we go, director Ridley Scott's much anticipated and controversial Moses flick, Exodus, Gods and Kings, hits theaters this weekend. I attended the premiere earlier this week and had a chance to speak with Scott and the star of the film, Christian Bale. This decidedly militaristic take on the major prophet covers Moses' first calling by God to the Israelites' escape across the Red Sea.
I came here to tell you that something is coming that is out of my control.
Moses' journey from non-believer to prophet is played with skill and depth by Christian Bale. The special effects, from the sweeping battle scenes to the chases to the dramatic plagues, are just what you'd expect from a big-budget Hollywood film. What will throw some viewers is Ridley Scott's decision to depart from the Scriptures at key moments. God, or his angel, even though he is referred to and identifies himself as I am in the movie, appears as a demanding and imperious child of 11. Is the message here that God is cruel and petulant like a child? Viewers will have to make up their own minds. Another concern for some faithful viewers may be the timing of Moses' encounter with God. The meeting occurs after Moses is pummeled on the head by a series of boulders rolling down a mountain. He endures a second head injury later in the Red Sea. So is Moses delusional? Is he brain damaged? The film doesn't say. Scriptural concerns aside, the movie plays like Scott's Gladiator amid the pyramids. I attempted to explore some of the artistic liberties taken when I spoke with Exodus director Ridley Scott and Christian Bale. Take a look. Ridley, I want to start with you. Why this militaristic Moses, if you will? He's almost a Semitic George Washington.
He was. As far as I know, as far as my research took me, which was taken down a route with a person who's very much knew a lot about Moses, like a encyclopedia, and also the whole Old Testament. And I was surprised when I took this on. In fact, prior to taking it on, I realized how little I knew about Moses, and I did not realize that actually he was military at all. And to find out that actually he was in fact an extremely capable military man, and in fact whether we enlarge a little or not, whether he was the commander of the Egyptian army, is up for discussion. But no, he was a military guy. I think that's how it assisted him in his thinking and his plan and his journey once he'd been banished.
Christian, you have described him in some parlance as a terrorist almost. What drew you to this?
No, let me correct that. Let me correct that. I never called him that.
You didn't?
No. I said the Egyptian Empire would have called him that. There's a big difference. I said he's a freedom fighter, but any establishment that a freedom fighter is fighting against is going to discredit that person by labeling them a terrorist. I never called him that.
Okay, good. Glad you correct the record, because it is everywhere. Tell me about playing the other part of him, the part where he's struggling with the divine and this divine calling. What drew you to that, and how did you approach it? And how do head injuries play a role here?
Well, what drew me to that is the biblical account. You know, the definition of Israelite is he who wrestles with God, and nobody wrestled with God more than Moses. When he first encountered God, and Moses was the only man to have ever actually sat face to face, seen God, laid eyes upon him, spoken with him, he said no. God asked him to go free his people, and he said, no, that's not for me. And God got very angry with him. And they have a very combative relationship. They disagree greatly. with each other, and that's the biblically accurate account.
Ridley and Christian, I want you both to comment on this. What about the decision to portray God as a little boy, a petulant at times, angry little boy?
He's a messenger.
Malach means messenger. He's not God. Malach is a word in, think Hebrew or Arabic, just kind of gets close, is a word for messenger. Some would say angel, but I prefer messenger.
Why portray him like that? Some have said it diminishes God.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go on then.
How would you have portrayed God?
Well, I don't know. How do you do it? The burning bush was, I guess I'd start with the bush, but you know, we see the bush, but then we also see this messenger appear.
Right, but
it's
it's
not
actually
just
your
detached
choice,
voice.
because it's this gentleman's actual choice. It's actually your choice. How do you present God? It's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Right?
Well, that's what I'm asking. What was the rationale? But behind
the rationale
that,
before
the double imagery almost of the child as well as the bush.
Well, you want to associate one with the other, and God is seen in many forms. He's seen most powerfully in nature, in trees, in seas, in storms, do these storms represent his anger, or is he replenishing the earth? He has seen the beauty and the bad stuff that happens here. I sound like a preacher, okay? But also,
you're practically converting us
yes,
here.
But but at the same time, he prefers not to present himself in a visible form. Therefore, we'll have messengers from time to time. So Malach was my idea. So if you don't like Malach, I can be blamed for that. I think you work great. And you can only call it, have you got children?
I do. I have 3.
Okay. Well, when a kid speaks his mind, I don't call him petulant. So you use the word petulant. So I think
it was a bold artistic choice. I was just wondering what the rationale.
He was intelligent. He was an equal to an adult. And if he says, I want you to do this, because he's that much younger, people get kind of irritated by that. And if I have a child talk to me like that who makes sense, I'm respectful. That's it.
One of the most moving parts of the movie was at the very end when you did that card dedicating it to your brother Tony. Tell me about the relationship with these brothers and how it changed.
We wrote it. It came to a choice when you're writing a screenplay and you're adapting such a massive story. There's a lot of decisions you have to make where you're constantly treading on thin ice, because you are having to be respectful of, 3 major denominations where Moses is one of the most important characters in all those 3 denominations, and therefore I have to be respectful of that, and therefore at the same time I don't want to diminish the story. I don't want to write a story that's going to please everybody.
Exodus, Gods and Kings will certainly not please everybody. It is much more accessible than the off-base Hollywood Noah that washed ashore earlier this year. You'll remember that one had the homicidal subplot of Noah attempting to kill his grandchild. Still, Exodus will be a challenge for those acquainted with the scriptural account. Be prepared. Moses doesn't really use his staff here. His brother Aaron is hardly seen. The plagues are not initiated by Moses, but are for the most part naturally occurring events set into motion by God in rapid succession. The messenger and Moses' repeated head traumas could also offend some viewers. For those not looking for a biblical Moses on the big screen, those seeking epic battles and over-the-top graphics, this may be the film for you. For everyone else, there's always Charlton Heston. Exodus, Gods and Kings hits theaters this weekend. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. You can also sign up for my free e-blast at RaymondArroyo.com. Let me know what you thought of tonight's show, and tell me who you think should be the world over's Person of the Year. Who made the most news that affected your life in 2014? Let me know. We'll have the big announce next week, as well as the World Over Christmas special with some all-new musical performances. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.